Hey, Karen.
How are you?
I'm great. How are you doing?
Very good. You look like you're in a very serene place.
Just a half an hour from you. So it's,
It has like a log cabin sort of country vibe to it, which is what
yes,
I think the plant behind you there, I'm like reacting
yes,
to that.
yes.
Yeah, lovely.
Thank you.
Lovely, awesome. Well, I'm so glad that we have this chance to get together, and it's so great to meet you. I'm so glad that it is kind of ironic because a lot of times I'll talk to people and they're clear across the country or the world, and we are so close in the same
Yeah.
state, which is really cool.
I don't know if you remember, but we chatted at the end of last year. We chatted a month or two ago.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And I remember, well, that was when we set this up, right?
Right, right,
Yeah,
right.
yeah. I thought you meant we chatted like years earlier or
No, no,
something.
no, no.
Yeah, no, I know. And I remember when it came up on my appointment book, I was like, "Oh, this is so great. I'm so excited we had such a great conversation and I was really glad to know that it was like coming up."
Yes, yes,
So
yes.
that's awesome. So, I thought a good place to start, and I know I sent you just some ideas of some questions. I can start with that, and then I just like to kind of go organically.
That's
Um,
fine.
but I really appreciated when you sent, kind of your bio and background. It was so interesting to read, especially your background when you were in theater and performing. I just found that super interesting. Uh,
Yeah. It wasn't theater, it was a women's world music group.
Music, right. Music.
Yes.
And I think there was like an expressive,
An expressive arts therapy program from
yeah.
College. Yeah.
Oh, got it. Yes, got it. And it was interesting because when I read that, I was thinking of sort of the parallels to teaching yoga and
Mm.
even practicing yoga when I think about, that sort of thing. So why don't we start out? Why don't you give just some background of yourself? And I'd love to hear, especially when I read that you had a fear of public speaking, how you shifted from that person to coaching people on public speaking.
So, in terms of my background, growing up, all I ever wanted to do was dance. And when I came up to Boston, I think it was in the 70s, I saw there was a summer program at Tufts University, which turned out to be dance movement therapy. I was 18 years old, and this completely changed my life because for me, up to this point, dance was about learning steps and
Mm.
performing those steps. So choreography and performing choreography. And in this class, it was all about the experience. What is the experience to try something out in movement? How does it make you feel? If you, let's say you're in pairs and you move close together and further apart, what is that experience? If you're moving around the room in a very curvy way and then very accented and angular, how does that feel inside? So it was an exploration of like human movement possibilities, journaling and reflecting on that. And it completely turned my whole orientation 180 degrees into something that was more externally focused to something
Mm.
that was internally focused.
Mhm, mhm.
And then a few years later, I had traveled around the world by myself and I really missed music. And when I came back, I decided I was going to take some singing lessons because I realized when I was traveling, I didn't have any songs I could sing from beginning to end. Like I knew like choruses or some, phrases, and I decided I was going to take singing lessons. Well, this woman, Sue Robbins, that particular year started a group, a women's world music group called Libana. And after some months of singing, and I never grew up singing, so it wasn't like this was my native place, but she invited me to join in. It was a large group, maybe 20 to 24 people. But over the years, people dropped out and I was left. And suddenly we were 12 people, and then we were 8 people, and then we were seven, and then six. And suddenly I was needing to be more visible
Mhm.
in the singing. But the beautiful part of the experience for me, or one of the beautiful parts, was that I was the principal dancer. So I was learning dances from all over the world, from Saudi Arabia and Hawaii and Africa and India. And then I would choreograph them for the stage and perform them. And, if I was just a dancer in a dance troupe, I would just be a body. Nobody would know my name. No one would come up to me. But because I was in this musical group and then stepped forward to do a trance dance from Egypt, people would flock to me afterwards to express their appreciation and how they were moved by my movement and my dance. And that gave me a vehicle for expressing myself through movement that I couldn't have gotten anywhere else because I wasn't really technically competent. I couldn't be with like Alvin Ailey or Mark Morris or any of these big dance guys. I was far, far from that. But somehow I'm able to really capture the essence of a style. And I loved learning from people from different countries. So it was very rich in terms of a cross-cultural experience. So it was a wonderful, and I was with them for 40 years. I just left them right before the pandemic, and I've been on more than 500 stages, and it was a fantastic period of my life. And during that time, I also went to Lesley College into their Expressive Arts Therapy program, and I did an independent study there, something called authentic movement and body mind centering. And again, these were other aspects of kind of in the dance therapy world. The authentic movement is a way of closing your eyes, listening to the impulse of your body and allowing it to move however it wants to intuitively and giving it permission and holding back on judgment. So your mind, rather than directs it, is following it. It's like, oh, what are my arms doing? What is happening with my shoulders? I want to curl up. Oh, isn't that interesting? So just allowing whatever emotions or movement wants to emerge, we follow it like a movie. At the same time, we're witnessed, where someone is holding space for us. So it's very profound that while you're moving with your eyes closed, you're aware that you're being watched. And there's that accompanying experience of, oh, being seen. I don't know if I want to be seen. I want to cover up. You might grab a blanket and pull it over your head and just kind of hide underneath it. And then you emerge, and then you have this feeling of, oh, I'm emerging. I'm letting myself be seen. So it has all of these layers of meaning attached to it. One of the things that I loved about this is that it was all nonverbal. So on stage, I hated having to introduce a song. We kind of like joked about it. There were some people that you couldn't get them to stop chatting as they introduced a song. And then there were the others of us that were like, please, do I have to? But our director insisted that we all have some place in the program where they heard our speaking voice. So I would white knuckle through it. And then in the grad program, my advisor invited me to give a presentation on the authentic movement practice because it wasn't something that was part of the Lesley curriculum at the time. It is now. But at the time, it was brand new. So I thought, oh, this is cool. I feel very flattered. I'm going to do this. And I assumed it was going to be other students in the programs. But it turned out it was all the department heads and faculty. And as they filled up the seats, I went into a panic. And my mouth turned as dry as cotton. In fact, I opened my mouth, no sound came out. No sound came out. And I kept trying to close my mouth, find some saliva. I think 3 or 4 times I opened my mouth. There was no sound. Finally, my advisor went and got a glass of water. It was before we carried around water bottles. It was in the early 90s. And finally, with the water, my voice came back, but I was so mortified. And I was in this, you can imagine, I felt like I was disassociated from my body. My heart was racing. I have no idea what I said. And when it was over, I felt so mortified. I said, I'll never speak in public again. Aside from having to introduce a song once in a program. But I didn't ever want to put myself in through that again. It was just so awful. And then about, I don't know, 10, 15 years later, something came up in my life where I felt inclined to step forward with something. And I really resisted it. It was with the Organic Farming Association. So I had a stint as an organic farmer. After I gave up this movement, like I was teaching authentic movement. I was teaching all these like breath and movement and moving in relationship to other people, a very, very clever, not just clever, but creative
Yeah,
classes.
sounds like
I didn't know how to make a business out of it. I didn't have anyone to model for me how to make money. I had a father who used to call me up every week and say, "So are you making any money yet?"
it.
Yes. So that was something that was a bit of a trauma for me. And after he passed away, I decided to give it up because I thought, who am I trying to prove myself to? I'm not making a living at this. I'm just struggling. And maybe later, but for now, no. And so I tried a few different things, and one of them was farming. Now, why am I talking about farming? Because it was through the Organic Farming Association that there was something I wanted to speak about. And the director said, you should speak to at the summer conference. Just before the keynote, I'll give you a couple of minutes to talk about this initiative. And I said, no, why don't you do it? I don't want to do it because I had this horrible experience speaking in the past. I don't want to do that. And she said, no, Linda, you've got the information, you have the motivation, the passion, just write it out, read it from the page. It's not a big deal. And I stood there like shaking with this piece of paper in my hands. Uh, but I got through it. And after that, right after that, she said, okay, now I want you to teach a program at the summer conference on this topic. And she got me twice a year, she got me to lead some kind of a workshop through the organic farming. I was always very nervous, but I always got through it and I felt proud of myself. So I entered what I call now the white knuckling through it stage. You know, you assume, yeah, I'm afraid, but that's all right. I'm going to manage it. I'll just white knuckle through it. It's worth it because I'm being of service,
Yeah.
you know? So it's akin to, and I realized looking back, whenever I taught classes, my heart was always racing. I never felt truly, truly relaxed, even though it was a, well, that's not true because while I was witnessing somebody, I would be dropped into my body. But when I had to speak, I always felt nervous. In hindsight, I realized that. While I was doing it, it just felt normal because that's what I always had to do. That was my state, was slight anxiety all the time when I spoke. After a few years in the field, selling local specialty vegetables to local restaurants, I'm listening to a podcast from a online business coach, 2013. I'd never heard of such a thing as a business coach before. New concept. And she was talking about starting the right business. And all of a sudden, here I am weeding the onions. And I stood bolt upright and went, holy moly, I've always wanted to make an impact. Because she's talking about like the impact that we want to make in the world.
Sure.
But I always wanted to make an impact, but I thought, oh, that's just grandiose. Who am I? That's just my ego trying to be significant. And then I thought, gosh darn it, no, that's what I want. I don't care if it's grandiose. I don't even know what kind of impact I want to make, but I must see what that could be. Because if I get to the end of my life and I don't try, I'm going to regret it.
Yeah.
And so I took a coaching program. I went online, built my website. And here I'm like, okay, now what? How do I get people to know about me? And the answer was, that felt the obvious thing for me was video. So I took a whole bunch of video classes trying to get comfortable. I felt so awkward. And during that one video mentor said, hey guys, new technology out there called live streaming. You got to be an early adopter. There's this app called Periscope. Get on it every single day. You're going to build a following. And I thought, here I am, kind of late-ish in my life. I'm going to be an early adopter. So nobody said, It's terrifying. So here I am. You press broadcast, people are coming in from all over the world. There was zero algorithm. They didn't even know what an algorithm was those days. It was like there was a map, a light started to bleep on the map around Boston, which is where I live. And someone from India or Turkey or Canada or France could come on, and you would see the names of people and the places they're from on your phone as your blood pressure is rising and rising.
Yeah.
And after the week was done, and I'm doing this every single day because I thought I'm going to do this every single day, I reached out to my mentor and I said, "Are you scared out of your wits too?" And she said, "Oh, Linda, you'll be fine. Just keep going. After 10 weeks, you'll feel good." I'm like, 10 weeks? Can I do this? And so I, looked up how to manage my fear, and I did affirmations and meditation and deep breathing and power poses and kicks and punches and dancing and holding crystals and reframing, the fear as excitement, and tell myself to, I was part of a group that had a hashtag called Do It Scared. So like feel the fear and do it anyway. And indeed, I got on every single day. And the weeks went by, and I get to week 10, and I'm about to press broadcast. And I notice my heart is still racing. And I thought, why is my heart still racing after 75 days? You would think that all this experience, all this practice, I'd feel calm. But no, I didn't know if there was something wrong with me or there was something wrong with the idea that practice makes confidence. But I decided I don't want to manage my fear. I don't want to spend an hour ritual just to get on to live stream. I want to get rid of this. How can I do that? I said to myself, you've got a master's degree in expressive arts therapy. You've got decades of performance experience. You have all the self-help tools that you've gathered along the way. What do you have? What do you have? So I made a whole list of all the things that I knew about, and I thought it looked promising. And I said, before I try to get rid of it, what is it? What is this fear? So I closed my eyes and I asked, if the fear could talk, what would it say? And what came back was, you're going to be attacked. And I thought, okay, is that cellular memory, like being chased by the saber-toothed tiger on the Serengeti? Or have I been attacked? And suddenly a picture in my mind comes to me of my sisters attacking me whenever mom put me in the center of attention. She would say, Linda's such a good girl. Why can't you girls be more like Linda? And I remember thinking, no, don't say that. Because as soon as she walked out of the room, they would kick me in the shins. They'd say, shut up. They'd call me stupid. And suddenly it hit me. Duh. Of course, I'm not comfortable being the center of attention, because there's a part of me that remembers it was dangerous to be the center of attention. And then I thought, whoa, if that could impact me, is there other stuff? And I thought, oh, what about the time I was bullied in 7th grade when all the girls said nobody talked to Linda? And I felt nobody was interested in me. No one wants to hear what I have to say. What about my father telling me, I'm not interested in what you're interested in? And I felt like I could never please him. He was never took me seriously. Yeah, that probably impacted me too. What about date rape? What about, just walking down the streets and having construction guys, heckle me, feeling like I don't want to be seen. I need to hide myself physically. All these things just came to my mind, and I thought, I didn't realize I had all this stuff. But I did have tools. I used something called EFT, Emotional Freedom Technique. You probably know it. I've been doing creative visualization since the 80s, when Shakti Gawain came out with her book, Creative Visualization. I had forgiveness tools. I knew journaling tools. I had dance therapy tools. So I applied all of these things. I really kind of made a study of myself, putting myself through the paces, doing a lot of forgiveness, a lot of letting go. And after 5 days, that racing heart melted away. It was gone. And that was 10 years ago.
Wow. That's remarkable that you were able to figure that out on your own. I mean, usually a person, whatever the challenge is, they created their mindset, their belief system, created the problem. And it's kind of like, I'm sure you've heard, you can't solve a problem at the level of thinking that created it. So that ability that you had to rethink and sort of step outside your current way of thinking was there. How do you think you were able to do that without falling into the same, because the ego wants to keep you in the space you're in, whether it's ego or just the part of you that is all the things shaped by all the experiences you had. So how did you separate yourself?
I believe it was because I didn't go through my mind. I went through the emotions inside my body. I revisited that time with my sister. I went back to the original roots, the causes of the anxiety. And I, through the EFT and reparenting or visualizing myself, making statements about, you know, feeling feeling picked on. My
Yeah.
sisters hate me. I really want them to love me. They're so jealous. I wish they weren't jealous. I wish mom didn't say that. So it's not like, it's not cognitive, it's
Mm,
emotional. And that's why I think it's called emotional freedom technique. So I
mhm,
was able through that technique and through then like visualizing my younger self and talking to her and telling her how wonderful I thought she was and how brave and isn't it wonderful that even having those awful experiences with her sisters, now she's good friends with her sisters. I'm so proud of her. And that I think it's because those original experiences, which weren't able to be resolved at the time, because I couldn't tell mom. She didn't know how to handle it. She wasn't parenting well enough to begin with. Like I would never say, Mom, they're picking on me. I mean,
right.
because they would just kick me again,
Mhm,
tattletale. It would just like whatever would anger them. And I didn't want to lose their love. So I just found coping mechanisms, which for me was to go to my room. I became very introverted. I didn't feel comfortable out and about in the house because very likely if they were feeling mean-spirited, they would call me stupid, tell me to shut up again. So I spent a lot of time in my room and I found ways to, just be happy in my own company
mhm,
and stay out of their way.
mhm,
And the same thing in school when that happened in seventh grade. I just learned to avoid those, girls, the cliquey girls, and just kind of mind my own business, stay out of their way. So all these coping mechanisms that I developed were the same things that, kept me from feeling comfortable putting myself out there. But once I resolved those original experiences, it was enough that suddenly I wasn't getting triggered. So this is what I think happens is that when we don't resolve those early experiences, we can, think of ignoring them, but they're not ignoring us. We're
mhm,
carrying them around and they are being rather loud and trying to get their attention, get our attention by, the sweating, the racing heart, the dry mouth, the blush,
mhm.
all those things. Is like, it's saying, look at me, I need some help here. And I think what's coming out is it's the asking of help from that younger self.
Mhm,
That's saying, I had this experience, it wasn't resolved. That's why I can't be here in the present moment.
mhm,
It's not about the present. I mean, like, let's say you're teaching a yoga class and you're feeling nervous. The people there aren't being mean to you. You're not in a congressional hearing with people trying to bust everything that you bring up. No, they're there to learn from you. They're open, they're eager. So it's not them that
mhm.
is creating the anxiety. It's something else. It's some message or some experience.
Yeah, I can relate to that, especially the part about connecting with your inner child. I've done some hypnosis work with a therapist, and that was what we did. And I'd never done that before. And I found that very powerful to go back to me at 5 years old, talking to me at 50 years old, and what would that part of me say? And it was very emotional, and I had never been guided through that experience. And I agree with you. I hear a lot from yoga teachers about outwardly what they want and outwardly what their fears are that are blocking them. And it's interesting because even if it's just in an email, so I'm not able to see their face or hear their voice, I can read between the lines that there's something in their past that has caused them to operate in the world in a particular way. And there's not always a recognition that when they walk into the room to teach the yoga class, kind of like what you said, that part of them is like barking at them. And internally, what they're experiencing, whether it's the physical symptoms or the mental aspect of it, like I'm afraid to walk around the room, so I'm going to practice with my students. It's kind of like the tail's wagging the dog, even though mentally they may want to walk around the room and in their mind have the courage to teach upright and walking around. But there's that other part of them that's fueled by all this life experience that's caused them to have a certain belief system about themselves. And that's really what's driving them to put their hands down on the ground, because that people looking at them brings up all these uncomfortable feelings. So
Yeah.
that a lot of that came to me as you were, even though you weren't speaking about teaching yoga, I was relating it to that. And the common thread, really is we are who we are, oftentimes shaped by the experiences we live. And at some point, we're going to have a reckoning if we want to, kind of like you said, you saw the opportunity to be the kind of person you wanted to be. And there you were at the crossroads. Were you going to face this fear? And I loved when you said you didn't want to come to the end of days, end of your life, not having tried. And I heard something on a podcast recently about when people are often at the end of their life, they don't often talk about regrets they have around material things that they didn't get. It's oftentimes ways of being that they wish, like, I wish I operated in my life with less of a controlling attitude or trying to control it. Like a lot of the examples he gave were ways of being, not necessarily I didn't go to France or I didn't buy that Ferrari. It was more, God, I wished I would have been less critical of my partner, just things that are often driven by all of these experiences we have in our life.
Yes. And I also love, Karen, what you were talking about, how how a teacher may feel like they need to practice with rather than like take up the space of being the leader, being, the teacher in the room. And because I feel like we we do absorb what we think are the rules,
Mhm.
but oftentimes we're putting the goalposts or the limits on either side closer together than they even need to be. And I love, that you probably what I'm intimating is that you're giving people permission to
Mm.
be outside what they previously felt was uh, a condition of teaching
Mhm.
yoga, that they had to do it with their students. But no, they could stand. They could
Mhm.
just stand on their feet in the front, or they could walk around the room.
Right,
And
right.
that you're giving permission.
Mm-hmm.
And
Not
I
that they need it, but it's like when they hear it, they say, it's kind of like Dorothy. I don't know if I gave you this metaphor. It's kind of like Dorothy at the end of the movie when she realizes she could have clicked her heels way at the beginning, but
right.
she had to go through that experience, and all the better for her that she learned all the lessons she's learned. When I have these conversations with teachers, it's not like I'm Glinda the Good Witch giving them permission. They already had it, but they're mired in this industry that is very rules based. Some of
Yes.
them, in fact, are teaching. I have conversations with teachers a lot who are teaching in studios that have a protocol they must follow. And usually it's very complex. It has to be this style of class and has to be done this way. Start out doing this, then do this. It's very constraining. And sometimes people enjoy that, but sometimes people don't. And so this ability to do it the way you want to do it is something that every yoga teacher has, just like the ruby red slippers, but they oftentimes are operating in an industry that doesn't reinforce that idea.
Exactly.
Right before this call, I had an email exchange with a yoga teacher, and she was starting out by saying what some of the challenges were. And then I asked her how long she'd been teaching, and she said 19 years. So imagine for 19 years, you're teaching in a way like we're describing, where you're like the bud ready to burst and walk around the room. And she described, I really wish I could teach more spontaneously. I really wish I could teach in a way that feels like, for 19 years, she's been experiencing yoga teaching in a rigid, constrained way. And that to me, on the one hand, it breaks my heart. On the other hand, I'm so glad that we've connected, and I hope we have an opportunity to work together.
Yes. You know what that brings up that I think affects us all is we go through an educational system that's very rule-based. And not only that, but it's based on that you get the best grades for making the fewest mistakes. So very few of us get out of the educational system without some kind of trauma around doing things right
Wow.
and doing it the right way. And when I hear you speak about this woman, what comes to my mind is how we are afraid to experiment. We're afraid, what if something doesn't go well? What if instead of we had a different educational system that said, take risks, try things out? No, not everything's going to work as well as other things, but that's part of the learning process. But that's not how they teach. So we're not able to come into, let's say, this kind of work and be experimental because we can't tolerate having a class that may not go well, like saying, oh, I tried that out,
Right.
probably won't keep that. But they can't tolerate having that kind of risk taking to do something that's experimental, and maybe it's not going to be the be all end all. They need to
Right.
be assured that they are going to have an excellent class and they're going to get the grade every single time.
Right, right. I think too, what's interesting about the idea of experimenting is when someone is having an unpleasant experience, whether it's for 19 years or 6 months or 1 year of doing anything. If we're talking about yoga teaching, we can say that. But in any part of your life, if things aren't going well, and the idea of experimenting is more fearful to you than the idea of staying where you are. I mean, I have lots of conversations where the teacher is quite unhappy with how things are going. And I'll say, well, why don't you experiment with teaching the same sequence for the next 5 classes and see, maybe by the fifth class, you'll be able to walk around more versus practicing with them. And then there's the other kind of counter argument. Well, what if my students get bored? Well, do you know for sure they're going to get bored? No, but I've heard that that's what will happen. Well, have you experienced that when you go to take class as a student? Well, no, but I've heard that if you, so it's like absorbing the beliefs of other people. And yet, even though your experience isn't what you want, you put that before what is actually happening to you when the risk is so low. So try it. You're in charge. You can always try it. And if it doesn't work, go back to what you're doing or experiment a little more. So I totally agree with you, that is something we get from that very rigid sort of academic structure. And life just isn't really like that.
So unless you join a yoga practice that they are giving you more rules to follow and they don't want you to deviate.
Yes, totally. So I'm curious, when I was learning more about your path and kind of how, I mean, I know sort of more than I think maybe the listener about where you are now. I'm curious about the bridge, because we got in our conversation to the point where you were doing, live streams, and I'm not sure what you were speaking on. But I know that, you have a book behind you, you've written a book, you're now coaching people around speak. So fill in that blank for me there. How did you end up there?
Well, I just have to say that I was speaking about how to de-stress your life, which I think is hysterically ironic now, because here I was completely stressed out as I was on camera. But I do remember like 2 weeks after that I had this whole transformation. I was having a busy day doing a lot of errands. And I think I had a commitment to come on at 11 a.m. or something like that. Or maybe I needed to get back for a particular time. And I rushed back, right under the wire, and I pressed broadcast. And the first thing I heard myself saying was, I've had such a hectic day, and I am so appreciative that I can just get on the camera now and relax.
Wow, what a transformation,
That
huh?
was it. And in my head, I went, relax on camera. Okay, I like this.
Wow.
And I realized
Hmm.
that I turned the camera on and it put me into, I was like entrained in a state. And I
Mhm.
think it could have been from all that pre-work that I had done to try to manage my anxiety. It didn't help me get rid of the anxiety, but it taught me a practice of getting into my body, of being present. Like I would do something really active first, like jumping jacks, kicks and punches. And then I would close my eyes and I'd meditate for a bit, and I'd get into my breathing and then do some affirmations. And I just like, like inside myself. So when I turned on the camera and I wasn't having that racing heart, I just felt centered.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting to hear you describe it, and I'm always fascinated when people have transformations, how they describe their way of being in the more desirable state than compared to where they were. Oftentimes, when I'm working with someone in my one-on-one program, when they start to get these revelations and light bulbs start going off and they start experimenting with things in their classes, usually it's about 2 or 3 weeks in, I'll say to them, describe to me what's different now compared to when you first enrolled. And it's interesting. I do it to try to get a sense of that contrast so that they can get a sense of the contrast, so that they can start identifying what's changed and how did I get there and what did I do? Because it really is, in a lot of ways, moving past a lot of the limiting beliefs that you had just 3 weeks ago. When you think of this woman teaching for 17 years, you're like, you could be so much closer than you think, and you can maybe not get that time back, but you can now start teaching in a way that's so much more aligned with the way you want to be showing up in the world. So yes, I was just inspired to share that, but keep going because I'm still kind of like looking for.
Yes, yes. So I just want to say, when this happened to me, it was not in my mind at all that, okay, this is what I'm going to teach. This is what I'm going to work with people on. No, I was just happy for
Yeah.
myself that I felt free.
Mhm.
I felt free to speak. I felt free. It was like, okay. And I went on to do 200 more periscopes
Mhm.
that year. And then Facebook started to offer live streaming. And then I moved over to Facebook and I was doing weekly live streams there because it didn't seem like daily was the thing on Facebook. And now I don't do live streams on Facebook at all because it just doesn't feel like it's the platform for it. I love TikTok live stream. That's my favorite place to do.
Got it. And when you go on TikTok now, what are you speaking on?
I'm speaking on overcoming the fear of speaking.
Okay. So you
So what happened? So what happened was uh, I started to share what I had done for myself with
Mhm.
other coaches, and people started to reach out and say, I'm afraid also, will it work for me? And I said, I have no idea because I do use my favorite modalities. I have my own story. I don't know if it'll work for your story, but we tried it and it worked. And then a few other people, and then someone who was a speaker on a stage, and I was not a speaker on a stage. She said, will it help me on the stage? I said, I don't know, but let's try it. And it did. And then I thought, oh, well, maybe this is something that I should be focusing on. And if I am going to help speakers, maybe I should take some speaking courses so I know what speakers are dealing with, like what is it like to go out on a stage and speak? What is it like to, what I didn't even, it's a whole other world. So I did take, I don't know, like 7 or 9 different speaking programs. I've taken more than 10 video programs just so that I could get a sense of what are people teaching, what can I contribute that adds to that? And my first course was Comfy on Camera. And I also did Heal Your Self-Image, because a lot of people were concerned with how they looked, and which morphed into Watch Yourself on Video Without Cringing and Make Friends with a Lens. So I was making these really wonderful courses. Now I have them all in a signature program. But it from a place where I thought, this is too narrow for me to focus on, just, I wanted to help people in so many areas, but I started to fall in love with this idea of speaking, because it felt like it went really deep and it went really wide, because I realized that, like, I just got asked to be on an accountant podcast, and then an insurance agent, and then a realtor. And I go into ChatGPT and I say, what are they dealing with? And
Mm.
I look at the answers and I go, oh yeah, everyone is public speaking in their industry, whether it's with clients or students or presentations to the team, or getting out on social media. I mean, everybody is dealing with having to speak in public in some way. And then all of a sudden I thought, wow, there's a lot of people out there that could use my help. And the other thing that really stood out for me is, after I had this experience of going to the root causes, I looked around at what other speaking coaches were doing. No one's talking about this. They will say, oh yeah, if you had a bad speaking experience, or if this happened to you, yeah, that'll affect you. But here, do this breathing exercise. Or here, build a script that is a really good script. Or here's a great way to deliver it, like show your enthusiasm, be over the top, or something like that. They're not actually teaching you how to get over the fear, how to clear those root causes. So that's when I decided to write my book, which came out 3 years ago. And I thought, this is what I was kind of praying for out on the field, weeding the onions. It's the
Yeah.
peace, it's the impact that I was hoping to be able to make in the world.
Yeah. I mean, I'm thinking as you're talking, like, what would your dad say, to see what you're doing now from those questions of,
He would probably say, so how much money did you make this week?
yeah, which in a way is part of who you are, part of, I'm sure, what was
Absolutely.
going through your mind. I mean, I certainly
Absolutely.
have memories of growing up and sitting at the table with my dad doing homework and feeling very much pressure, and it has to be perfect. And that shaped who I am. And when I, in my early days of teaching yoga, would teach, I would have a very rigid view of the right way and the wrong way. And that came from, in part, those sessions with my dad and making sure it's right. And he's a biochemist and he's so smart and I want to get my dad's approval. I mean, I totally agree with you. When I work with teachers, no one else really dives into some of the things that I ask them that frees them.
Mm,
It's for so many of the teachers, they'll say, like, how come nobody's ever talked to me about this kind of stuff before? And that's when, I realized, like, wow, this is just so impactful to, like you say, help people realize they have agency over how they teach their class. And in that agency, they're able to finally start to step through a lot of these limiting beliefs and show up really authentically. And that's when it does become, just like you said, when you rushed home and then immediately you were able to drop into that part of you who is a teacher. I mean, that's what so many of them that I talk to, there's all this rigmarole before they teach. There's all of this mental shifting they have to do. And I always say, like, imagine if you just were doing something else and then just look, oh my God, I gotta go teach, and got in your car and drove to the studio and walked in and you were just like, blah, 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 and then got in your car and drove home and went on with the rest of your life. Like, it's just a seamless, you're like, just like a ninja. You're just going through all these different, in a way, roles that you play, but in an integrated way, not in a separate way.
that's beautiful.
Yeah, so I loved when you said that because I can relate to that too. Many times when I come in here to do Instagram lives and stuff, I'm like, oh, this is so great. This is part of what I do. It's just part of who I am. It wasn't always like that, but yeah, I can relate to the nervous feeling. And I definitely remember Periscope, and I was not as committed as you. So I give you a lot of credit for that. So just tell me, like, what does your life look like now? Like, who are you helping and how are you helping them? You talked about the courses and you have the book and you have a podcast. I mean, however you want to, I'm just curious, like if someone's listening and they're thinking, wow, like how are you actually, is it this sort of like, well, however you want to share it, share how you're helping.
Well, that's it's a great question. I'm thinking, I should like sometimes I go into like a week of seeing what I'm doing hour by hour. So because sometimes I do wonder, where am I spending all my time? So I would say that the bulk of my time, so I have my signature program and it has three parts: clear your fear, comfy on camera, think on your feet. And also I have um, a module on loving and transforming the sound of your voice, because I feel like our voice is our instrument, and how we use our voice is so impactful. But we, just like how we are our conditioned selves, we use our conditioned voice, and we don't really think about consciously or mindfully how we are, what the tone of our voice is, how we express with our voice, the emphasis, the melody, all of the volume, the quality of the tone, that we just kind of speak how we speak. Or we might, let's say, you might have an idea of how you're supposed to sound when you speak and then go into that. Like I can imagine, like when you're teaching a class, you might think, oh, I need to speak with a soft voice, or, a particular kind of voice. So, and I used to do that when I did meditation audios. So so the voice is really important. So I'm teaching my classes and I have private clients as well. And then I would say a lot of my time is on creating content,
Mhm.
because people come in from LinkedIn, people come in from TikTok, they come in from the podcast that I'm on. So I love doing these things too. I mean, I struggle with writing. I'm always I always have like a writing coach of some sort. I had a book writing coach. I've had different people that I've gotten help with in writing posts, and I'm still kind of trying to figure out who the real writing me is, like where my voice is as a writer. So I feel like I do spend a fair amount of time on that. I think because I've had so many astrologers tell me that communication and writing is my like home base.
Mhm.
And even though it sort of feels like, no, it doesn't feel like my home base, it feels like what I'm aspiring to. But in
Mhm.
either case, whether it's my home base or what I'm aspiring to, I feel like I feel compelled to devote attention to learning in those areas. So I spend a lot of time on social media, not on social media, but creating content for social media. And let's see, then back end business stuff,
Yeah.
like creating my programs, like making videos, and the email of sending, well, that's again writing to my list, and just getting organized. I think getting organized is something that I have struggled with, creating systems and
Mhm.
like slowing down a little bit. I think in my 10 years that I've been doing this, I've tried to cover too many bases at once. And therefore, I feel like my forward movement has been slow, but it's been
Mhm.
wide. So at this point, I feel like I'm kind of caught up to myself. I
Mhm.
wish I had known like 10 years ago that this was like a 10-year project, rather than, I kept thinking, oh, this is the year, everything's going to come together. But like last year, I spent so much time on figuring out my systems and getting more organized. And like even after we get off this podcast, I want to take time to reflect on it.
Mhm.
What was unique about it? What did I like about it? And I'm in the process now along these lines of creating speaker journals, so that every time we speak, or every time I do a podcast, I can have a way of mentally preparing and emotionally preparing for it, with my
Mhm.
intentions and what I want to feel and how I want to be and what I want to work on or focus on. And then at the end to like have a similar kind of debriefing process. So slowing down, I want to slow down a bit more now, and feel like I get more out of the experiences that I have.
Mm. Yeah, I find that interesting. Sometimes actually a lot of times when I talk to teachers or if I'm making a video, I'll say to them, at the end of your class, when you're driving home, I believe one of the most important questions they can ask themselves is, how do I feel? Not how did I do, or did I get feedback that was positive, but how do I feel? Because if I don't feel good, then what might be causing me to feel not good? Is it that I had this perception of how I might teach and I didn't meet that perception? Is it because I perceived people weren't liking it? Like, what was it? Because in identifying that, I can start to experiment with different things. And sometimes the things, like if I perceive that somebody didn't like it, well, I can't run around and be a people pleaser. That's not the answer. The answer is, how can I carry myself differently to be comfortable with the lack of control I have over someone's reaction to my class, knowing that I can't control how someone's going to perceive my class. But nobody really talks to yoga teachers about, how do you feel? The whole industry is based on feedback. Get feedback. Have a teacher in your class watch you and then give you feedback. And it's all this external, similar to what you described at the beginning with your dancing, which was much more of an internal experience. And so, I always say to them,
Or based on our educational system of, getting an external person to tell you whether you did a good job or not.
yeah,
Yeah.
totally.
Mhm.
So you had mentioned working with people one-on-one. It reminded me of a question I thought of before we met, which is, I appreciate you described your perceptions of yourself and your life and how that affected you when you were public speaking and the experiences you had both in your body and outside your body. When you work with people one-on-one, what kinds of common things come up from people around public speaking? Because I'm sure, because I have a lot of yoga teachers, obviously, who listen to the show, I'm sure there'll be some crossover there, even though you're not working specifically with yoga teachers, the fears are agnostic, right?
Right. Well, I would say that most people come to me because they're feeling some level of anxiety and
Mm,
discomfort, and they feel like they're either white knuckling through, or they feel like no matter how prepared they are, they still feel a little bit nervous, and they just don't want to feel that way.
yeah.
Or it could be that people are avoiding doing any speaking because
Mhm.
of this anxiety that they feel. And so they're giving up opportunities. They're not taking certain positions
I
or
hear that too. I'm not teaching, or I quit teaching, or I'm just subbing.
mm-hmm. So I would say that's the basic common denominator. What if I ask them what they're worried about? That can have a range of answers. It could be, I'm afraid of looking foolish. I'm afraid of being judged. I'm afraid of losing my reputation. People are going to think poorly of me. I guess these are all kind of overlap. I
Mm.
don't feel good enough. I mean, things that I've actually heard you speak about on your podcast, all of these, mind things. And then what I like to do with those things, like if you're afraid of being judged, like for me, it was, I'm going to be attacked.
Mhm.
I feel like I'm going to get attacked. It was like this very sharp physical feeling.
Mhm.
I like to take that and go back and say, well, where have you felt judged?
Mhm.
Where did you feel foolish? Where were you embarrassed?
Mm.
Where were you hurt? So that's one way back. I have several ways we go back. Once we get, another way we go back is I like to find out about people's relationships with their parents and their siblings and what happened at school and their teachers and the relate work experiences. Like, where have they been criticized, put down, or judged, or abused in any of these ways? And whatever comes up, I just get enough detail for us to do an EFT session with
Mm.
it, or to do a creative visualization, or to do some journaling. I might recommend some journaling. So so it's not like talk therapy, where we spend weeks discussing your narcissistic father. No, I learned some things, we get some images, some phrases that he would say, and we do the work with it. We clear it away. And it may be that we need to do a little more work the next time or further down the line. But generally, something comes up, do some kind of like creative work and move it out from our lives. I mean, it's not like we push it out, but we allow it to release, we allow it to let go. And I incorporate in the EFT forgiveness and letting go, and also speaking to the inner child. I can fold that into the experience.
Yeah, I mean, I would think, I mean, certainly there's a whole separate genre of therapy that this kinds of stuff can be dealt with. But I think even just if we look at just your experience, you could articulate that your fear was around being attacked, but before your epiphany, you hadn't related being attacked to your past. And
Not at all, not at all connected to the speaking. I didn't realize I had stuff to
yeah,
clear around speaking. If I realized, I would have done it years earlier because I
right.
had the tools. Because nobody's talking about it,
Right.
it didn't enter my mind.
Right. And this is exactly the conversations I have. No, and they'll say no one's talking about it. But it's interesting because, when you're walking into a speaking experience or when you're a yoga teacher walking into the room to teach, it's not like you magically become this enlightened being. You're bringing everything. So I thought it was so interesting when you had this revelation, you could then start to look back in your life and see these other scenarios with your mom, with your classmates, with your sisters, where you were literally attacked. So it's like, wow, I'm not making this up. This is a real thing I've experienced. And of course, my nervous system would be protecting myself. My brain would be protecting myself from going into a situation where I might feel that way again. So when you already sort of touched on this, but just to sort of recap. So when you hear these fears, you have sort of an experiential through the EFT way of helping them, as well as, even if you didn't do that, just the mere conversation to allow them to see, wow, my fear is not coming out of left field,
Yes.
must be just like so revelatory for them. Do most of the people you work with, are they public speaking in career type settings? It's like for their job or something along those lines?
It ranges. Some people, I work with professionals, so doctors, lawyers, whatever,
Okay.
um, dance teachers. I work with people who are working in companies, so they may be managers, HR, or team leaders, or in the C-suite. I work with people who are on the teams, so it's all of those. And then I work with a lot of entrepreneurs
Yes.
who want to put themselves out on social media, or who want to do a TED Talk, or who want to, speak at conferences. And then there's some people who, I'd say most people want to do it for some aspect of their work.
Yeah.
Occasionally, I'll get somebody who says, I've been asked to sing at my best friend's wedding, or I want to give a toast at my daughter's wedding, or I want to read a poem at my niece's wedding, something like that. So occasionally there's something coming up that someone really, really wants to be able to do, but they feel panicked about it. And they want to be able to enjoy the experience because it's a special experience.
Hmm. Um, I wrote down a question and I want to make sure I get to this, because many times I'll talk to a yoga teacher who wants to have a transformation, an epiphany similar to yours. They might not literally be saying that, but they're yearning to teach differently than they are now. And what they'll say is, I think I'm too old. I think I'm too old. And, and for some of them, they started teaching after they retired, or they started teaching when their kids went to college. So these are mostly women who are in their late 40s, 50s, 60s. Maybe they began teaching in their late 50s or whatever age, whatever it is. And they feel like, because of their age, the opportunity for change is gone. So I'm curious what you would say about that.
Well, I'll just share my experience that I was 60 years old when I got over my fear of speaking. I'm going to be turning 70 this year.
Wow.
So my answer is it's never too late. But that being said, I think what the feeling is about is that when you have carried this around for a long time, it feels compounded.
Right.
That, we had, it's not just, the experiences you had as a kid or in school, but all those decades as an adult where you felt like you couldn't speak up, that you couldn't put yourself out there, or you held yourself back in some way. So that feels, it's kind of like the all these experiences glom together, and that glom feels like it gets bigger and bigger and more complex. And that's the feeling that they're probably experiencing. But I don't believe that it is any indicator in your being able to get over this, because I've worked with people even in their 70s.
Mhm. Yeah, well, I'm glad we had a chance to talk about that because I know some of the folks listening will relate to that. And I want
Mm-hmm.
to encourage people, like if not now, when, right? This is the perfect time.
It is. I mean, we still have the rest of our lives to live.
Of
Let's be free.
Yes, and that relates back to when I was commenting before about that other podcast I listened to, when you are at the end of days, right? Wouldn't it be amazing to look back and, even if it was just for 10 years, you were really living in the most vibrant way, wouldn't you rather that than know that you want that and not have done it?
Yes. I was just listening to a death meditation, and the person who was leading it was saying a lot of people have an enlightenment before they die because they let go. They let go of all their stuff. And I was thinking, would it be fantastic if we had a little time to enjoy that state of having let go of our stuff?
Yeah. Well, I think
So,
of that too when people are cured of cancer or have a traumatic medical scenario and they come through to the other side and their perception of their life is so different because they were in that moment where they thought, I just saw something yesterday on TikTok, just last week or 2 weeks ago, a man was pushed in front of the subway and he was under the train as it was going over him. But because he's a native New Yorker, he knew if he moved, he would hit the third rail and he would immediately die. And somehow he was alive. And of course, other people saw him, so they were able to call for help. And he said it was like 10 minutes that he was under the train until they could move the train to where it separates, and they pulled him up by his arms to get him out. And all he kept saying was, I have a 12-year-old dog at home. I know I'm going to be in the hospital for a while. Will someone please go take care of my dog? But there he was on this clip I saw 2 weeks later, and he had various injuries, but he's okay and his dog is okay. And you think of something like that as life changing. Like now you have another opportunity, and I'm sure people like that live differently. And we can all do that. It doesn't take, the traumatic situation. It's just a matter of are we going to do it? So, well, this is great. I'm so glad we had this chance to meet and to talk. I've just found it so wonderful to hear about you and all the amazing work you're doing. And I didn't expect that story behind it. It's just so revelatory to hear your path. And I'm sure it's going to be really inspiring to the people that listen to this. So thank you very much. I want to give you a chance. I know the book is behind you, and so when we post this on YouTube, they'll see it. But for people who are listening, tell us about your book, what it's about, what it's called, and where they can get it.
The Light in the Limelight is the name of the book. It's the name of my podcast. It's the name of my program, because I don't want people just to get over their fear of speaking. That would be enough.
Mm.
But I feel like we can all, speaking is our human design. I really want speaking to be something we enjoy doing. So that is the journey that I take you through in the book, of guiding you from the fear to the dread to the delight, if you like alliteration. And you can download a free chapter of the book on my website, Linda Ugelow ugelow.com. That's Ugelow. And I also have a speaker preparation checklist, which is not just about, it's not about the what you're going to say, because a lot of people practice what they want to say, but it's kind of like how you can prepare yourself to be more grounded, focused, and energized when you speak. So if you go to my website or you find me on any social media, Linda Ugelow, Ugelow.
Yes, I saw you have a very robust TikTok following, and that's great. I mean, for listeners who are on the TikTok, hopefully it will be with us for longer, and
We'll see.
you can find you there. And I actually think that that guide to speaking would be great for a yoga teacher. I mean, even though it probably wasn't written with them in mind, I'm sure a lot of the grounding tips and tips in general will be really helpful. So I'll be sure to link those in the show notes along with your book and your website, so it's easy for people to find.
Thank
So,
you, Catherine.
of course. Well, thank you for your time. This has been fabulous. And we'll have to meet for a cup of tea sometime since we are in the same
Neck of the woods. Yes,
Bay
definitely.
Area. I would love that. So thank you so much. And I will send you a link. This will go live on Monday. I know I might have originally said the following Monday. I had a little change in my guest scheduling. So today is what? Today's Wednesday. So this will go up on Monday. So
Okay,
I'll
great.
send you the link then.
Wonderful. I'm
All
excited.
right.
Thank you. This was great. So glad we got to do this together.
Bye.
Bye.